welcome to another edition of the Nick and Jeff Show. We're very happy to see you. Jeff, it's good to see you. It's been a while,
Awesome
hasn't it?
to see you. It's been some time now, Nick, so I'm glad we're back together.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to go with our usual flow. We're going to have a fun session today. We're going to talk about the news, views, and gossip of the industries we're in, which everyone seems to enjoy. I've been getting some good feedback on that. We're going to have a couple of topics we cover today. So what I wanted to also talk about with you was some of the interesting developments in my world and your world. So my world being the EOR, HR outsourcing, payroll, talent world. There's been some interesting things occurring over the last month or so. And then we can talk a bit more about the VMS, MSP, IC space, independent contractor space, where again, there's some activity, new firms setting up. I know you have a very serious interest in that space. And then we can talk about talent in general. So, you know, on the EOR side, what do you make of all the, let's call it merry-go-round or ins and outs of CEOs in the space? We've seen some pretty fundamental shifts and changes with companies like Velocity Global, Globalization Partners, People 2.0, Top Source Worldwide. We've seen CEOs shift in and out, and tends to be the PE-backed companies where that's been the case. There's been a lot of movement in the VC space as well. I saw one of the smaller players acquired, or at least their book of business, it looked like an asset purchase, remote acquired the assets or EOR business of Panther. So that was interesting. But what do you make of the PE-backed space, specifically the companies I mentioned there? What's your take on it?
Well, it's been really interesting to see it and the timing within the last 6 months or 8 months or so. You know, typically the private equity firms will make an investment, and there was a ton of investment in our space, of course, right? Probably about the last 24, 36 months. And so they make their investments, they buy their platforms, they see how things are going. And if the numbers aren't what they expected, and some had lofty expectations, quite honestly, they make these changes. And so it wasn't unpredicted, because, you know, we're going into an economic cycle and have been in an economic cycle that you're not trending drastically down, but you're trending down. And that's not what they forecasted in their financial models. And with that, what we're unfortunately seeing is some switching at the helms, right? And in typical style, for most part, they've been hiring outsiders to the industry. And as an observer, outsiders to our industry come in, and I think we've spoken about this, come in as financial assassins, right? And they're looking at it as an asset on a spreadsheet, and they're looking to maximize essentially EBITDA. And so they're cutting staff, they're changing service lines, they're bumping up some sales and marketing efforts from time to time, or decreasing sales and marketing efforts. But, you know, so that's kind of my take with that, is they look at it as numbers on a page and not as a people in a relationship business. As we all know, in staffing, you know, great relationships are made often between individuals and their clients. And when that person is forced out of the company or cut or not having a good time and moves somewhere else, often that business in time moves, even if they have non-competes, etc. Those all expire and or aren't enforceable, and the business moves with them. So, you know, just hiring financial people to run human capital, and specifically contingent workforce management and staffing businesses, sometimes, you know, sometimes it works, but I've seen more merry-go-round, like you say, than positivity when these changes are happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. Professional CEOs taking over these types of businesses. Again, we'll see where the chips fall, but ultimately, I've also noticed actually quite a lot of these firms are pivoting from pure EOR or employment outsourcing, probably by necessity, because employer of record was the sexy, cool kid on the street. and the shine is slightly worn off. It's actually it's a pretty niche business. It's a great business, but it's unpredictable revenue. And actually, in this stage of the economic cycle where you have mass layoffs and friction, headwinds, it's understandable that these companies are servicing, they're employing their workers, many of which are being laid off or going through mutual terminations, mutual agreements. They're going to suffer, right? And therefore, there's a big risk to these businesses. So one of the things we're seeing is price pressure, because there's still a lot of incumbents. Okay, will the market sustain 15, 20 players? I don't think so, especially around the bigger VC-backed companies that have raised significant capital. I would coin those as zombie corns, companies that are neither dead or alive, because they're not generating the revenue to sustain the commercial interests. And I don't see how they can pivot from that position unless they weave in some form of platform play or app store type play to sustain. So it's really interesting. I think the next 12 months is going to be interesting. I think there'll be consolidation. I believe, I think you said that before, that there will be some form of maybe payroll and EOR tie-up in the space, maybe BPO and EOR tie-up, maybe even recruitment or talent or MSP tie-up to be able to service the clients from A to Z. And we'll see how that pans out. But, I think ultimately the end user, the client, needs to have the best quality service. And the problem is when you chop half the workforce out of necessity to show the growth and the revenue and EBITDA, you're chopping away typically a lot of the service element in a service-led business. It's very different when Elon Musk chops 70, 80% of his workforce in X, formerly Twitter. It's a proper platform technology play. This is not the same. It's a service element. So if you take away your key asset, which is your internal staff and your operational delivery teams, you're going to be in trouble. So we'll see how it all maps out. Layoffs are never fun. We get contacted, or I get contacted every day with people looking for jobs, and I feel sorry for those people because, again, you're walking into a difficult environment, costs going up in many parts of the world, US, UK, technically in recessions, Europe's tough. But there's pockets of activity as well. And what about anything else on the update side? What else have you been seeing?
Yeah, as another topic that was continuing to be hot was the direct sourcing, of course. A lot of the enterprise client customers were interested in that discussion, how to implement direct sourcing. And, one of the things that I often will say is, depending on where they come from, if it's an HR department versus procurement, if it's procurement, I often will say, let's talk to your HR folks and talent acquisition folks, because they've been directly sourcing internal staff for years and years and years. So some of the methodologies and ideas of engaging and, using your employer brand to attract and source candidates have been done before. So it's not really a new topic. It's just new to the contingent world. And so there was a lot of conversation around direct sourcing, even though it has been muted slightly because of the economic cycles where companies aren't hiring as much. So they're not as interested in the topic because it's just keeping afloat is some of the, and cost cutting is some of it, the topic. And direct sourcing is a cost cutting kind of can create some cost savings, but when you're not really doing any hiring, it's not a priority in some of the organization slips. But it was a topic to be discussed.
Any tools that came off the back of it? Any tools that companies mentioned, or methodologies, anything interesting?
Well, once again, I go back to, hey, if you're running a contingent program and you're not in HR, or you haven't talked to your HR group, talk to your HR group. And it's been interesting, some of these the layoffs we've been seeing in our actual industry. I was talking to a chap the other day saying, is this indicative of now a potential push to total talent management, where if there are redundancies and duplicative roles, are they going to finally find a spot for the contingent programs? So, a lot of the programs came out of 2000, 2008, 2009 recession, and procurement jumped on it because it was decentralized, and by centralizing, you can save millions of dollars. Well, that ship has sailed. They've squeezed the juice and all of the margin out of to save all that money up front. And then it over the last couple of years, it's become a real talent shortage issue. And when you think about redundancy, well, wait a second, if HR has already got people in place doing this, why do we have a program team over here that really isn't supposed to be procuring talent? It just happened to jump on the bandwagon to start procure talent. It should be in HR. And so is that some of these layoffs out of the procurement folks that run programs indicative of maybe that trend of consolidation and finally moving it in under HR and saying, hey, listen, talent is talent, no matter how they're engaged?
And talking about talent, you got me thinking. One of the other topics and trends that I'm seeing on LinkedIn and many conversations I'm having is and we talked about it before, but there's some updates, the shift to, let's call it talent arbitrage or geographical talent arbitrage, remote talent hiring. From some of the programs in general, we're seeing MSPs, direct hires as well. What's your take on, let's talk about from a North American perspective, and I can come at it from another angle. What's your take on and it's EOR led as well, but remote hiring engineers, hiring sales, hiring customer service? I would coin it nearshoring. So the nearshoring trend as opposed to offshoring, which can have a negative connotation. And I was talking about this on an HR.com webinar. Offshoring has typically a negative connotation. It's maybe an older methodology to bring on teams in countries like India or Vietnam, and you have your shared services there. But the move now to hiring talent in locations favorable from a language or time zone perspective, Africa, Asia as well. Have you seen anything from a US North American perspective of firms tapping into talent hotspots elsewhere to potentially save money, potentially to have a bigger talent pool? What's your take on that?
Well, the large US multinationals, are investigating that. Some of them have operations already in global facilities, but generally that's either been through acquisition or just global expansion of the operations. That whole labor arbitrage, I'm not sure if they fully got that perfected, right? And so, the pandemic bringing in remote work as the way of working has opened up that idea and made it more feasible that you can do it, because we're on the opposite sides of the world talking, right? Or you could be down the street. It doesn't matter where your location is anymore, the way we work today with remote work and the technologies and the infrastructure that have been built. So they're investigating it. I'm not sure if they've perfected it. I think a lot of the online staffing platforms, the freelancer management systems are pushing and allowing for access to these global resources in the most efficient ways possible. Yeah. And they are the fastest growing sector of the staffing industry. So there is a ramp up, but it's still not the norm. It's kind of the exception in enterprise programs. I think over time, though, you're seeing this ramp up. The issue becomes compliance, right? As it always has been. It's still a lot of the online platforms that are making huge advances in allowing for global resources to be acquired easily and builds the infrastructure to work with them easily, lack their compliance. And so that enterprise buyers are still a little bit hesitant to do that.
Right.
So, the traditional ways of managing resources are hard to do it with global resources. The new ways of managing resources are easier, but are lacking some of that,
Yes.
compliance issues, so that people are hesitant to implement those programs.
Yeah.
But it's coming along, and rapidly coming along, right?
Yeah, I think it's a major benefit to companies in that startup scale-up space that are looking to be fast and efficient. Companies that are trying to take on the big boys, being able to hire in certain geographical locations from a cost access to talent perspective is really interesting. I've seen some companies that I found particularly exciting online, companies like Bloom, Talentium, Cradle for the African market. I think it's a very noble cause, an interesting cause. These companies coining things such as social impact staffing, so giving companies all around the world access to talent that is hungry to work, that is available to work, that has access to internet. We now have Starlink, the internet connection that can enable people in certain locations to have fast speed internet. So I think it's I love seeing these stories online when you see the workers empowered by this technology and tools, workers in places in remote locations in Africa, and some more developed economies in Latin America that have 4x or 5x their take-home pay, and they're now able to put money in the local communities. They're able to support their families. Now you've talked about compliance, and you've got the whole, are they employers or are they an independent contractor angle? How are they being paid? Are they being paid in local currencies? Are they being paid in US dollar? There's a big shift for individuals, obviously, to want to be paid in US dollar in these locations, because that dollar holds far more weight in those local markets, especially with devaluing currencies. So that's something that I think it needs more time to be worked out. There's an interesting social dynamic shift there as well, as this money floods into local communities and enables them to expand and explore. So, and I see that even from the Middle East. Companies here, there's a big startup community accessing talent in Asia Pacific, in locations such as Indonesia or Philippines or Thailand. Executive assistants, customer support, sales, tech support. I think it's a great way to scale your business and diversify. And you've talked about diversity, inclusion, and I've seen so many stories of companies that have taken advantage of that. And I like what you're doing with your other interest.
Yeah.
Consciously Unbiased, which is we've been following very closely as well. So I see some really positive green shoots and things that get me personally excited, seeing a new region expand, because the European and North American markets are pretty mature as well in the way they work, and there's a lot to learn from that. So I think that will continue.
And I think, one other topic on the kind of gossip front is I call them employer of record API or marketing systems, the systematic EORs, like the Deals, the Papayas, etc., the GPs that are all building out a technology layer, and then they tend to be more like an API to the true EOR, in-country EORs afterwards. And their valuations a while back were through the roof, but now the revenue hasn't caught up with those valuations. So there seems to be either some consolidation happening or a lot of kind of press releases out in the market to go after each other a little bit.
There's been a bit of fisticuffs,
yes,
in that realm, and I get it. I mean, when you're dealing with tens and 20, 50, 100,000s of workers, some things are bound to fall through the cracks when you're scaling at that speed. And I don't think it's a bad thing that it's come to light. And I would anticipate competitors to make the most of that and put the foot down a little bit. But again, raising awareness of the malpractice the shortcuts is a good thing because it lifts the quality of the aggregate market, because clients become more aware of what's correct and what's not. So in their decision-making process, the questions they ask and demand answered are far more sophisticated. So one trend for sure in the last 6 months is clients have become, and rightly so, much more savvy about what the products are, what to ask, what is expected, what's compliant and what's potentially not compliant, which is again a good thing, because it enables them to make correct choices, as opposed to when this industry was fledgling and growing, it was all very exciting and sexy and employ anyone anywhere, employ anyone with a click of a mouse. But everyone now understands if you're employing, you can't just click a button and employ within 2 clicks. That doesn't exist, because there's onboarding considerations, and actually more complicated, there's offboarding considerations, and clients need to go in with their eyes wide open around what the pros and cons are, depending on the country and the jurisdiction and the worker and the role. So yes, let's see how this all plays out in the coming weeks and months. I have my views, but we'll see how it plays out.
Once again, this has been the Nick and Jeff Show, with news, muse, and gossips, talking about hot topics and taking your questions.